I could feel every eye in the reception hall turn toward me as I stood up from the rickety chair at table 19, the farthest table from the wedding party, tucked behind a column in the corner. My grandson Michael's face drained of color as I gently tapped my water glass with my spoon. "I'd like to make a toast to the happy couple," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in years. And to express my gratitude that at least I was invited to witness this beautiful celebration at the Rosewood Estate, the venue I secretly paid for 6 months ago. The silence that followed was deafening. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My granddaughter-in-law Emma's champagne. Glass froze halfway to her lips as Michael stared at me with a look of dawning horror. The guests who moments ago had barely acknowledged my existence now couldn't look away. 60 years of teaching elementary school children had taught me the power of a well-timed revelation. The morning had started with such promise. I'd spent weeks selecting the perfect outfit, a deep blue dress that brought out my eyes and hid the worst of my 78-year-old frame's betrayals. I'd had my silver hair professionally styled, a luxury I rarely indulged in, and wore the pearl earrings James had given me on our 50th anniversary, 3 years before cancer took him. The invitation had come after months of hardly hearing from Michael. Once my adoring grandson, who spent every summer at our lakeside cottage learning to fish and gathering fireflies in mason jars. Now a successful architect, engaged to Emma Chatsworth, daughter of one of Boston's oldest families. I'd been thrilled. When he'd called to tell me about the engagement, listening patiently as he described Emma's family's expectations for a society wedding. "They have traditions, standards," he'd explained, his voice carrying that apologetic tone I'd come to recognize. "Emma's family has been holding weddings at the Wellington Club for generations, but they're booked for the next 2 years." I remembered the weight of silence on the line when I'd asked if there was anything I could do to help. "Thanks, Gran, but Emma's parents have it handled," he'd said quickly. "They're looking at some other venues." What Michael didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been saving for decades for just such an occasion. Teaching had never made me wealthy, but James and I had been careful with money. We'd invested wisely, lived simply, and put something away each month for our grandchildren's futures. After James died, I'd continued the practice, finding comfort in knowing I could still contribute to their happiness, even if my role in their lives had diminished. So when I heard through Michael's sister Jennifer that they were despondent over not being able to book the prestigious Rosewood Estate, Emma's absolute dream venue, Jennifer had confided, I made a decision. I would give my grandson the wedding venue of his dreams, even if I couldn't give him the social connections his future in-laws possessed. The call to Rosewood had been straightforward. Yes, they had a cancellation for May 15th. Yes, the $38,000 fee was due immediately to secure the date. I transferred nearly every penny of my savings without hesitation, asking only that they keep the source of the payment confidential until I chose to reveal it. A surprise gift, I'd explained to the bemused event coordinator. I'd imagined the moment so differently, perhaps a private revelation to Michael before the wedding, watching his eyes light up with that familiar gratitude and love I remembered from childhood Christmases. Or maybe I'd whisper it to him during our dance together at the reception, the dance I'd assumed would be part of the celebration. Instead, I arrived at the Rosewood Estate that May afternoon to discover my name card placed at table 19, surrounded by distant acquaintances of Emma's family, who seemed equally puzzled by their banishment to the hinterlands of the reception hall. No corsage awaited me like those adorning the mothers and grandmothers of the bride. No mention of me in the elegant printed program that detailed the couple's familial connections going back generations. I sat quietly through the ceremony, blinking back tears as Michael and Emma exchanged vows beneath an archway of white roses and silver eucalyptus. He looked so handsome, so much like his grandfather in his formal attire, that for a moment I could almost forget the growing distance between us. At the reception, I watched as the wedding party entered to thunderous applause. I observed Emma's grandmother, a formidable woman in designer attire, being escorted to a place of honor at the head table. I smiled politely as course after course was served, making small talk with my table mates, a former colleague of Emma's father and his wife, a distant cousin visiting from Seattle, and a college friend who'd barely made the guest list cutoff. "And how do you know the happy couple?" the college friend asked me during the salad course. "I'm Michael's grandmother," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "His father's mother." The expressions around the table shifted subtly. Confusion, then awkward sympathy as they glanced toward the head table where Emma's grandmother sat in a position of honor. "The wedding is beautiful," offered the cousin kindly. "The rosewood was an excellent choice." "Yes," I murmured, watching as Michael moved among the front tables, stopping to chat and take photographs. It certainly was. As the reception progressed, I became increasingly aware that Michael had not once looked in my direction. The table visits he made never extended to the back corner where I sat sipping water rather than the champagne that flowed freely elsewhere. The realization settled over me like a heavy blanket. I wasn't just seated at the back, I was being deliberately overlooked. When Emma's grandmother rose to give an emotional speech about family tradition and welcoming Michael into their illustrious fold, something shifted inside me. The speech was met with enthusiastic applause, crystal glasses raised in celebration of connections that would continue for generations to come. I thought of James then, of what he would say if he could see me shrinking into the background of our grandson's wedding. James, who had taught Michael to build his first birdhouse, who had slipped him candy when I wasn't looking, who had started the college fund that helped put Michael through architecture school. "You're allowing yourself to be erased, Eleanor," James would have said. "That's not the woman I married." It was then that I decided, if I was to be relegated to the periphery of this celebration, I would at least ensure that my presence was acknowledged. After decades of putting others first, of quiet sacrifice and uncomplaining support, perhaps it was finally time to stand up and be counted. So I rose from my seat at table 19, the table of afterthoughts and obligations, and gently tapped my water glass, not yet knowing exactly what I would say, but certain that I would finally be heard. The silence following my announcement stretched across the reception hall like a physical thing, wrapping around each table until even the string quartet in the corner stopped playing. Michael's best man, his childhood friend Trent, let out a low whistle that seemed to echo in the cavernous space. "Gran," Michael finally managed, his voice cracking slightly as he stood from his ornate chair at the head table. "What are you talking about?" I smiled, feeling oddly calm despite the hurricane of emotions swirling inside me. "The Rosewood Estate. Michael." When Jennifer mentioned it was Emma's dream venue but unavailable, I made a few calls. Fortunately, there had been a cancellation. A murmur rippled through the guests. Emma's mother, Victoria Chatsworth, elegant in her champagne-colored gown and impeccable coiffure, leaned over to whisper something to her husband, whose face had grown increasingly red. "But we paid for the venue," Emma said, confusion evident in her voice as she looked between me and her parents. "Daddy handled all the arrangements." I clasped my hands in front of me to stop their slight trembling. The Rosewood required payment in full to secure the date. I transferred $38,000 6 months ago with instructions to keep the source confidential. I wanted it to be a special surprise. I paused, meeting Michael's stunned gaze directly. Though I admit, I imagined the surprise would unfold somewhat differently. What no one in the room knew, what I hadn't planned to reveal, was that the $38,000 represented not just savings, but the sale of the lakeside cottage where Michael had spent those childhood summers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The place James and I had hoped to retire, the place where we'd imagined hosting family gatherings for decades to come. After his death, maintaining it alone had become increasingly difficult, but I'd held on to it as long as I could, unable to part with those memories. When I finally sold it last year, I'd earmarked the proceeds for my grandchildren's futures. I never expected to spend nearly all of it on a single day, but Michael's happiness had seemed worth the sacrifice. Now, standing before a room of strangers and a grandson who had placed me behind a column, I wondered if James would understand. The choice I'd made. Emma's father, Richard Chatsworth, stood abruptly. There must be some mistake. I personally arranged payment with the Rosewood management. I have the receipts, the documentation. You arranged the flowers, the catering, the decor, I said gently. All itemized separately in your agreement. With the Rosewood. But the venue itself, the architectural marvel that serves as the backdrop for today's celebration, that payment came from my account. The event coordinator, Melissa, who had been discreetly managing the proceedings from the sidelines, stepped forward with a slight nod in my direction, confirming the truth of my words without needing to speak. Richard Chatsworth's expression shifted from indignation to confusion. But why wouldn't you say something? Why keep it a secret until now? I looked around at the beautifully appointed tables, at the faces turned toward me with expressions ranging from shock to embarrassment to morbid fascination. I wanted to give Michael and Emma the perfect day without any obligation, a gift freely given with no strings attached. My voice softened as I added, I didn't realize I would be seated so far from the celebration that I would need binoculars to see my grandson's face. A few uncomfortable laughs broke the tension, but Michael's face had transformed from shock to deep shame. He knew, as I did, about the summers at the cottage, about how much it had meant to both of us. Recognition dawned in his eyes as he connected the timing of the cottage sale with the venue payment. The cottage, he said quietly, but in the hushed room everyone heard. Gran, you didn't. Emma looked between us, confusion evident. What cottage? My grandparents had a place on Lake Winnipesaukee, Michael explained, his voice hollow. We spent every summer there when I was growing up. It was special. It was just a building, I said, though we both knew it was a lie. What matters are the memories we made there, and I thought we could make new memories here today. Jennifer, seated at a nearby table with her husband and children, had tears streaming down her face. Unlike Michael, she had visited regularly after James died, bringing her children to fish off the dock and collect the same fireflies their uncle once had. She had been heartbroken when I sold the cottage but had understood my practical reasons. What she hadn't known until this moment was where that money had gone. Emma's grandmother, Beatrice, who had been watching the scene unfold with shrewd eyes, suddenly rapped her cane against the floor. Well, she announced in a voice accustomed to being obeyed, this is most irregular. Richard, Victoria, did you know about this arrangement? Victoria Chatsworth's perfectly composed expression faltered. Of course not, Mother. We would never have. That is, we wouldn't have relegated the woman who paid for the venue to the equivalent of Siberia? Beatrice finished for her daughter, arching one immaculately penciled eyebrow. The room collectively held its breath as Emma slowly rose from her seat, her white gown catching the light from the chandeliers. She looked at me, then at her parents, and finally at Michael, who seemed frozen in place, caught between worlds. Michael, she said quietly, did you know about the seating arrangement? He swallowed visibly. I saw the chart yesterday during the rehearsal. I noticed where Gran was seated, but Emma, there was so much happening, and your mother said the arrangements were finalized, and I didn't want to create problems right before the wedding. I hadn't planned to cause this scene, to create this rupture in what should have been a joyful day. Standing there, feeling every one of my 78 years, I suddenly wished I could take back my impulsive announcement. The cottage was gone. The money was spent. What did I hope to accomplish by revealing the truth now, except to make my grandson face his own complicity in my exclusion. "I apologize for the disruption," I said, my moment of defiance fading as quickly as it had appeared. "Please, everyone, enjoy the celebration. That was my intention in making the gift, after all." I began to sink back into my seat, prepared to disappear once more into the background of my grandson's life, when Emma suddenly handed her bouquet to her maid of honor and began walking toward me, her dress whispering against the polished floor. Emma reached me just as I settled back into my chair at table 19, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and genuine concern. She took my hands in hers, her diamond engagement ring catching the light. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said softly, using my formal name for perhaps the first time since Michael had introduced us 2 years ago. "Please, would you join us at the head table?" There's been a terrible mistake. Before I could respond, before I could process this unexpected gesture, my mind drifted back to another time, another life, when I was simply Eleanor Pierce, long before I became Mrs. Sullivan or Gran, or the elderly woman relegated to the back of the room. I was born in 1945 in a small town outside of Portland, Maine, the youngest of 4 children and the only girl. My father worked at the paper mill, coming home each evening with the smell of wood pulp clinging to his clothes. My mother taught piano lessons from our front parlor, the notes of Chopin and Bach drifting through our modest home at all hours. Education was sacred in our household, despite limited means. My brothers were encouraged toward college, toward careers beyond the mill that dominated our town's economy. I was encouraged toward teaching, respectable for a woman, my father said, and secure. I followed that path willingly, finding joy in the classroom from my very first teaching practicum. There was something magical about opening young minds to the wonders of literature, mathematics, and science. By 22, I had my teaching certificate and my first classroom of 3rd graders at Pinecrest Elementary. It was at a teachers' conference in Boston that I met James Sullivan, a science teacher from a neighboring district with a booming laugh and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He offered to share his table at the crowded conference luncheon, and by dessert, I knew my life had irrevocably changed. We married in 1968, a simple ceremony in my parents' backyard with roses from my mother's garden decorating every available surface. James had wanted to take me to Europe for our honeymoon, but we were both practical by nature. Instead, we put the money toward a down payment on a small Cape Cod-style house with a garden for me and a workshop for him. Teaching filled our weekdays, and weekends were spent fixing up our home, visiting with friends, and eventually preparing. For our first child, Robert came into the world in 1970, a colicky baby who grew into a serious child, and later a driven young man with James's analytical mind and my love of books. We had hoped for more children, but nature had other plans. After several heartbreaking miscarriages, we poured all our parental energy into Robert, creating a home filled with curiosity, laughter, and unconditional love. When Robert met Catherine Wheeler during his 2nd year of law school, we welcomed her with open arms. She was brilliant, ambitious, and clearly smitten with our son. Their wedding was held at Catherine's family church, a traditional affair that seemed to set the tone for their life together. Always proper, always striving for the next achievement. Michael was born in 1992, followed by Jennifer 2 years later. James and I fell headlong into grandparenthood with an abandon that surprised even us. We converted our basement into a playroom, installed swings in the backyard, and began saving for college funds before either grandchild could walk. It was James who found the cottage on Lake Winnipesaukee, a ramshackle structure with peeling paint and a dock that tilted precariously into the water. The listing agent seemed surprised when we made an offer the same day we viewed it. "It needs a lot of work," she cautioned. "That's part of the appeal," James had replied, already envisioning the renovations he would make. For 3 summers, we spent every weekend at the cottage, James replacing rotted boards and upgrading electrical systems while I painted walls and sewed curtains. By the time it was ready for its first full summer with the grandchildren, it had transformed from an eyesore to a charming retreat. Those lake summers became the centerpiece of our family's life. Robert and Catherine would drop the children off, for weeks at a time as their law careers demanded increasing travel and longer hours. Michael learned to swim, to fish, to build campfires under James's patient tutelage. Jennifer collected rocks and wildflowers, helping me create elaborate pressed flower art that still hung in my apartment. As the children grew, the cottage remained a constant, the place where cell phones had no reception, where board games replaced television, where family meals were eaten on the screened porch with the sound of loons calling across the water. When Robert and Catherine's marriage began to falter, the cottage became a sanctuary for Michael and Jennifer during the turbulent years of the divorce. Weekends when neither parent could adjust their schedule to accommodate custody arrangements often meant impromptu trips to the lake, where James and I tried to provide stability amid their parents' unraveling relationship. After the divorce was finalized, Catherine moved to Chicago for a partnership opportunity, and Robert threw himself even more deeply into his work. The grandchildren's visits became our lifeline, our purpose. "We're not just grandparents anymore," James observed one evening as we watched 14-year-old Michael teaching 10-year-old Jennifer to skip stones across the lake's surface. "We're their safe harbor." When Michael left for college at MIT, following his father's footsteps toward a high-powered career, the visits became less frequent, but no less treasured. He brought roommates occasionally, then girlfriends, each one evaluated against the unstated, but understood criterion. Did they appreciate the simple magic of the cottage, or did they check their watches, wondering when they could return to civilization? James's cancer diagnosis came the winter after Michael's graduation. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, aggressive but treatable, the doctor said. We fought it together, as we had faced every challenge in our 46 years of marriage. The cottage became James's goal, his motivation during grueling chemotherapy sessions. "I just want one more summer at the lake," he told me, gripping my hand as the drugs dripped into his veins. We got that summer, though James was weaker than he wanted to admit. Michael came for a week, taking time from his new architectural apprenticeship to help with maintenance tasks that had become too difficult for his grandfather. James died the following November, peacefully in his sleep. At the funeral, Michael stood tall in his dark suit, so much like his grandfather that it stole my breath. He delivered a eulogy that spoke of fishing lessons and stargazing, of a man who taught him that patience was the greatest tool in any endeavor. "My grandfather built things to last," Michael said, his voice steady despite the tears tracking down his cheeks. "Relationships most of all." After James was gone, I tried to maintain our traditions. I invited the grandchildren to the cottage the following summer, but their lives had grown increasingly complicated. Jennifer came with her new husband for a weekend. Michael called with regrets, a major project at work, an unmissable opportunity. The cottage began to feel too big, too empty without James's presence and the family gatherings that had defined it. Maintenance issues multiplied beyond my ability to manage alone. The property taxes increased while my fixed income remained static. For 3 years I held on, unable to part with James's labor of love, with the physical space that held so many of our happiest memories. But each winter brought new damage from frost. Each spring revealed more repairs needed than I could afford. When the realtor's sign went up in the yard, I couldn't bear to watch. I signed the papers in my attorney's office, then drove home without looking back at the place that had shaped my grandchildren's childhoods and contained the best parts of my own life. The money from the sale sat in my account, earmarked for Michael and Jennifer, a down payment on a house perhaps, or seed money for Jennifer's children's education. It was meant to be my final gift to them, my lasting contribution to their futures. Until Michael called about his engagement and the wedding venue of Emma's dreams. Now, standing in the Rosewood Estate, with Emma's hands holding mine and the eyes Of hundreds of guests upon us, I wondered what James would think of how I'd spent our legacy, and what he would say about the distance that had grown between us and the grandson who once knew every inch of our hearts. With Emma's hand still holding mine, I glanced up to see Michael making his way through the tables toward us, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Behind him, the Chatsworths appeared frozen in tableau, their social composure visibly cracking. "Please," Emma repeated, "join us at the head table. It's where you belong." As I rose somewhat unsteadily to my feet, the weight of decades pressed down on me. Years of quiet sacrifice and unacknowledged effort that had shaped not just my life, but the lives of those I loved most. Teaching third grade for 43 years had never made James and me wealthy. We lived comfortably but modestly in our Cape Cod house, careful with our spending, meticulous with our savings. When Robert was born, we started a college fund with just $20 a month, a significant amount from our teachers' salaries. In 1970, I remembered the years when James took summer jobs painting houses and building decks to supplement our income. I graded papers at night after Robert went to bed, then woke at dawn to prepare lessons before he stirred. We drove the same cars for 15 years, patched and repatched clothing, and learned to stretch grocery budgets in ways that would impress even the most frugal Depression-era housewife. "We're investing in the future," James would say when I occasionally longed for a vacation beyond the borders of New England or a dining room set that wasn't secondhand. "Our sacrifices now will pay dividends later." Those dividends appeared in Robert's acceptance to Harvard Law School, a dream beyond anything James or I had dared to imagine for ourselves. The tuition was staggering, even with scholarships and Robert's part-time work. We remortgaged our house, delaying our retirement by 5 years. I took on after-school tutoring for additional income, while James drove the school bus route before his teaching day began. "Are you sure about this?" Robert had asked when we presented him with the funds for his final year of law school. "It's so much money." "Education is never wasted," I told him, echoing my father's words from decades earlier. And family supports family. When Robert and Catherine married, we gave them the down payment for their first home, a gesture that represented years of careful saving and delayed gratification. Their gratitude seemed genuine, if somewhat perfunctory, as they quickly became absorbed in establishing their careers and social position. The grandchildren brought a new dimension to our lives and our financial planning. Even as we poured resources into renovating the lake cottage, we established college funds for Michael and Jennifer, contributing what we could each month. "They'll have opportunities we never dreamed of," James said as we watched baby Michael sleeping peacefully in his portable crib at the cottage. "And they'll always have this place to remind them where they came from." The divorce changed everything. Robert and Catherine's bitter legal battle drained not only their resources, but impacted ours as well. We helped Robert with legal fees when his practice suffered during the emotional turmoil. We covered Jennifer's therapy sessions when Catherine's insurance claimed they had reached the maximum benefit. We purchased school clothes, paid for summer camps, and tried to maintain stability for grandchildren whose world had suddenly become unpredictable. "It's not how we planned to spend our retirement," James acknowledged one night as we reviewed our increasingly strained finances. "But what else can we do? Their family." After James's cancer diagnosis, our carefully constructed financial security began to crumble. Insurance covered much of his treatment, but the deductibles, co-pays, and uncovered medications created a steady drain on our savings. I sold my mother's antique secretaire, and James reluctantly parted with his collection of rare scientific books, sacrifices that felt insignificant compared to what we were fighting for. During one particularly difficult period when James needed an experimental treatment not covered by insurance, I approached Robert for help. He was a partner at his firm by then, with a salary that dwarfed our combined lifetime earnings as teachers. "Of course, Mom," he said, sounding distracted over the phone. "Send me the bills. I'll have my assistant take care of it." The check arrived. Promptly. accompanied by a generic "Get Well" card signed by Robert's assistant. James insisted on paying it back once his condition improved, and we did, pulling from our diminished retirement fund to satisfy his sense of independence. After James died, maintaining the cottage became increasingly difficult. The property taxes alone consumed a significant portion of my fixed income, and the maintenance costs kept mounting. Hurricane damage one year required a new roof. The septic system failed the next. The dock needed replacing after ice damage. Began using my retirement savings to cover these expenses, unable to bear the thought of selling James's beloved project. Each repair felt like preserving a piece of him, a tangible connection to the man who had been the center of my world for nearly 5 decades. Jennifer noticed my struggles during her infrequent visits, expressing concern about my dwindling resources. "Gran, you can't keep pouring money into this place," she said gently. "Maybe it's time to think about selling." "Not yet," I always replied. "Just not yet." When Michael graduated from MIT with honors, I gave him James's watch, a vintage Omega that had been a gift from the science department upon his retirement. It wasn't valuable in monetary terms, but it represented James's dedication to education and his pride in his grandson's similar academic achievements. "Thanks, Gran," Michael said, giving me a quick hug before turning back to his celebration with friends. The watch disappeared into his pocket, and I never saw him wear it. As the cottage expenses mounted and my savings dwindled, I finally accepted that I couldn't maintain it alone. The decision to sell was agonizing, made bearable only by my intention to use the proceeds to help Michael and Jennifer secure their futures, a final gift from the grandparents who had loved them unreservedly. The day the cottage sold, I sat in my car overlooking the lake, remembering James teaching Michael to cast a fishing line, Jennifer collecting pine cones for crafts, the laughter that had echoed across the water during countless summer evenings. I said goodbye not just to a building but to a chapter of our lives that had defined us as a family. Now, as Michael reached us at table 19, his face reflecting dawning comprehension, I wondered if he remembered those lessons at all. The value of sacrifice, the importance of family, the principles that had guided James and me through decades of careful stewardship. "Gran," he said, his voice barely audible over the murmuring crowd. "The cottage money. You used it for the wedding venue?" I nodded, suddenly too emotional to speak. Emma looked between us, clearly piecing together the significance of what was unfolding. "Michael, what cottage? What's happening?" Michael swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "My grandparents had a cottage on Lake Winnipesaukee. I spent every summer there growing up. It was special to all of us. Your grandfather built most of it with his own hands," I added softly. "The bookshelves in the living room, the window seats, the bunk beds in your room. Gran sold it last year," Michael continued, the realization spreading across his features. "I knew it was getting too difficult for her to maintain, but I didn't. I never thought about where the money went." Emma's grip on my hands tightened. "And you used that money to pay for our venue, without telling anyone?" "It was meant to be a gift," I repeated. "Something to make your day special." "While we put you at the back of the room," Emma said, her voice hollow with realization, "behind a column where you could barely see anything." The string quartet, sensing the tension, had begun playing again softly, providing a gentle soundtrack to our uncomfortable tableau. Guests pretended not to stare, busying themselves with dessert while stealing glances at the drama unfolding near table 19. Victoria Chatsworth appeared suddenly at her daughter's side, her social mask firmly back, in place. "Emma, darling, perhaps this conversation could continue privately. Everyone is watching." Emma straightened, releasing my hands but remaining beside me. "Yes, everyone is watching, Mother. They're watching as we recognize that Michael's grandmother paid for this entire venue while we seated her at the furthest table in the room. I hadn't wanted this, hadn't intended to create a scene that would overshadow the celebration. The weight of attention felt suffocating, reminding me of why I had always preferred to give quietly, without recognition. "Please," I said softly. "Let's not make this the focus of your wedding day. That was never my intention." But as I looked at Michael, really looked at him, I saw not just embarrassment, but a deeper recognition. For perhaps the first time in years, he was seeing me not as an obligation to be managed, but as the woman who had helped shape his life through countless unseen sacrifices. "Gran," Michael said, his voice steadier now as he took a decisive step forward. "Please come with me." He offered his arm in a formal gesture that reminded me so much of James that my heart constricted. I placed my hand in the crook of his elbow, feeling the fine wool of his tuxedo beneath my fingers. Together, with Emma beside us, we began walking toward the head table. The guests' eyes followed our progress across the ballroom, the whispers rising and falling like waves against the shore of the lake I'd recently surrendered. As we moved through the reception hall, my mind drifted to the values that had guided my life. Values I had hoped to pass on to my grandchildren through example rather than lecture. Values that seemed increasingly rare in a world that prized appearance over substance, convenience over commitment. James and I had developed our core principles early in our marriage, shaped by our own parents' examples and the cultural backdrop of post-war America. We believed in education as the great equalizer, in service to community, in the dignity of work well done. We valued authenticity over pretense, relationships over possessions, and the quiet satisfaction of helping others, without expectation of recognition. "People will forget what you said and what you did," my mother often told me, "but they'll never forget how you made them feel." This philosophy guided my teaching career, where I strove to create classrooms where every child felt valued, capable, and heard. James approached his science teaching with similar intention, believing that knowledge without character was hollow. "Facts can be memorized," he would tell his students, "but understanding must be earned through curiosity and persistence." Together, we tried to embody these principles in our relationship with Robert. We celebrated effort over achievement, kindness over social status, and responsibility to others above personal gain. When Robert brought home a B+ in algebra but had helped a struggling classmate improve from a D to a C, we were more proud of his tutoring than his own grade. "Success isn't just what you accumulate," James would say, "but what you contribute." As Robert grew older, entered law school, and built his career, we watched with mixed emotions as his value system seemed to shift. The ambitious drive that helped him excel academically began to overshadow other qualities we had tried to nurture. His measure of success increasingly centered on professional achievement, financial security, and social position. "He's finding his own way," James reasoned when I expressed concern. "Our job was to plant the seeds. We can't control how they grow." When the grandchildren came along, we saw another opportunity to share our values through daily interaction rather than didactic instruction. The cottage became our classroom for life's most important lessons. At the lake, we practiced conservation by cleaning up not just our shoreline, but neighboring areas as well. We demonstrated respect for nature by observing wildlife without disturbing it. We cultivated patience through fishing, persistence through swimming lessons, and problem-solving through maintenance projects. "Watch how the loon cares for her babies," I would tell Jennifer as we observed the birds from the dock. "She teaches them to find food, to dive when danger threatens, to navigate the lake. That's what family does. Prepares you to face the world." With Michael. James spent countless hours in the small workshop attached to the cottage, teaching him to measure twice and cut once, to respect his tools, to appreciate the difference between work that was merely adequate and work that represented his best effort. "This isn't just about building birdhouses," James told 10-year-old Michael as they sanded a project smooth. "It's about integrity. The parts nobody sees should be as carefully crafted as the parts everyone admires." When the children bickered over whose turn it was to ride in the canoe or who got the last popsicle, we used these moments to teach fairness, compromise, and considering others' needs. When neighborhood children visited, Michael and Jennifer learned to practice inclusion and hospitality. The divorce tested these values in ways we hadn't anticipated. As Robert and Catherine's conflict intensified, they sometimes used the children as messengers or pawns in their ongoing battle. During summers at the cottage, James and I tried to create a neutral space where Michael and Jennifer could simply be children, free from the burden of adult animosities. "Your parents both love you very much," I would tell them when they arrived upset after witnessing another argument. Sometimes adults struggle to remember what's most important. "Why can't they just be nice to each other like you and Grandpa?" Jennifer once asked, her small face troubled with concerns beyond her years. "Because being kind when you're hurting is one of the hardest things to learn," James answered. "It's a muscle that needs constant exercise." We never criticized Robert or Catherine in front of the children, believing that undermining their parents would ultimately harm Michael and Jennifer. Instead, we modeled respectful communication, conflict resolution through compromise, and the practice of separating behavior from the person. "We can disapprove of choices without rejecting the person who makes them," James would say. "That's part of loving someone fully." As the grandchildren entered adolescence, we saw these early lessons begin to bear fruit in different ways. Jennifer developed a profound empathy for classmates facing challenges, volunteering as a peer counselor and organizing support for a family who lost their home in a fire. Michael's path was more complex. His natural intelligence and charm opened doors easily, sometimes allowing him to bypass the harder work of character development. When his architectural talents were recognized early, praise came readily from teachers and mentors. "Be careful of gifts that come too easily," James cautioned him. "The qualities that will sustain you through life's challenges are built through difficulty, not natural ability." During Michael's junior year of high school, we faced a defining moment when he was caught helping a friend cheat on an exam. Rather than making excuses or trying to minimize the impact, James insisted Michael take full responsibility. "Your reputation for integrity is built over years, but can be lost in a moment," James told him. "This is a chance to decide who you want to be when facing consequences, not just when receiving accolades." Michael had served his suspension, written apologies to his teacher and classmates, and ultimately emerged with a deeper understanding of ethical boundaries. James and I had been proud of how he handled that difficult period, seeing it as evidence that our core values had indeed taken root. As we reached the head table, Michael pulled out a chair between his seat and Emma's, disrupting the careful place settings that Victoria Chatsworth had undoubtedly arranged with military precision. "This is where you should have been all along," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Emma nodded her agreement while her mother pressed her lips into a thin line of disapproval. "Michael," I began, still uncomfortable with the public nature of this reconciliation. "It's not necessary to—" "It is necessary," he interrupted, his voice firm. "Gran, do you remember what Grandpa used to say about how we treat people when no one is watching?" The memory surfaced immediately. James kneeling beside 7-year-old Michael after discovering he'd taken a candy bar from our pantry without asking and hidden the wrapper. "It's who we are when no one is watching that reveals our true character," James had told him. "And it's how we treat those who can do nothing for us that shows what we truly value." Looking at my grandson now, I realized that perhaps those early lessons hadn't been lost after all, just temporarily obscured by the distractions of ambition and social climbing. Something in his expression reminded me of the thoughtful boy who had once helped James build a wheelchair ramp for our elderly neighbor, working diligently through a summer weekend when his friends were at the community pool. "I remember," I said softly. "I forgot," Michael replied, his voice cracking slightly. "But I'm remembering now." As I took the offered seat at the head table, feeling the eyes of the wedding guests still upon us, I wondered if this moment of recognition would last beyond the emotion of the day, or if the values James and I had tried to instill would once again be submerged beneath the demands of Michael's career and his new social circle. Emma reached over to squeeze my hand, her diamond engagement ring catching the light. "Thank you," she whispered, "not just for the venue, but for raising the kind of man who, when reminded of what matters, still knows how to make it right." The reception continued with a strained normalcy, the string quartet playing cheerful melodies as waitstaff cleared dessert plates and replenished champagne glasses. From my new position at the head table, I could see the entire room, the floral arrangements I'd only glimpsed from table 19, the ice sculpture slowly melting near the bar, the dance floor waiting for the celebration to shift into its next phase. Victoria. Chatsworth had recovered her composure, though her smile remained fixed and brittle as she engaged in conversation with guests who stopped by the table. Richard had disappeared briefly, returning with the wedding planner and the Rosewood's manager in tow, presumably sorting out the financial revelations that had disrupted their carefully orchestrated event. As I sat somewhat awkwardly between Michael and Emma, accepting congratulations from wedding party members who suddenly seemed eager to acknowledge my existence, I reflected on the path that had led me to this moment. Not just the immediate decision to fund the venue, but the lifetime of choices and challenges that had shaped who I had become. Teaching had never been an easy profession. When I began my career in 1967, classrooms were overcrowded, resources limited, and expectations for female teachers particularly constraining. My first classroom had 32 third graders, a single chalkboard, and a collection of textbooks, so outdated that they still referred to 48 states. "You'll make a lovely teacher until you start your family," the principal had told me during my hiring interview, the assumption being that marriage and motherhood would naturally end my professional aspirations. I proved him wrong, balancing motherhood and teaching with James's steadfast support. When Robert was born, I took the minimum maternity leave the district allowed, returning to my classroom with lesson plans prepared during late-night feedings and a determination to show that motherhood had enhanced rather than diminished my professional capabilities. The 1970s brought integration to our previously segregated district, creating new tensions and challenges. Some parents withdrew their children. Others stayed but expressed their displeasure through hostility towards teachers who supported the changes. James and I received anonymous phone calls and once found our mailbox smashed after he spoke at a school board meeting in favor of implementing a diverse curriculum. "We're on the right side of history," he assured me when I worried about the impact on Robert, who was sometimes excluded from birthday parties because of his parents' outspoken stance. Some things are worth standing up for, even when there's a cost. Through the educational reforms of the 1980s, the testing mandates of the 1990s, and the technology revolution of the 2000s, I adapted my teaching while maintaining my core belief that education should nurture curiosity and character, alongside academic achievement. Each challenge required flexibility without compromise of principles. By the time I retired in 2010, I had taught over 1,000 children, mentored dozens of student teachers, and helped develop a district-wide curriculum that balanced standardized requirements with creative exploration. The retirement party filled the school gymnasium with former students spanning 4 decades, doctors, mechanics, artists, parents, all sharing stories of how their time in my classroom had influenced their lives. "You didn't just teach us reading and arithmetic," said a former student who had become a pediatrician. "You taught us to believe in our capacity to grow and contribute." That celebration represented the culmination of a career built on persistent effort, continuous learning, and unwavering commitment to seeing potential in every child, even those labeled difficult or deficient by other educators. James's career had followed a similar trajectory. When budget cuts threatened to eliminate the hands-on science program he had developed, he wrote grants, solicited community donations, and eventually established a partnership with a local environmental organization to ensure his students continued receiving experiential education. Together, we had built lives that balanced professional dedication with personal integrity, finding ways to thrive despite limited resources and systemic obstacles. We had constructed a marriage that weathered health crises, financial setbacks, and the painful fracturing of our son's family without losing its foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose. The cottage at Lake Winnipesaukee had been our greatest joy and most challenging project. When we purchased it, friends questioned our decision to take on such an extensive renovation with our limited skills and budget. You could rent a place for 2 weeks each summer for less than your mortgage payments, a well-meaning colleague pointed out, but James had vision beyond the rotting porch boards and outdated plumbing. "We're not just buying a vacation home," he explained. "We're investing in a legacy of memories." Weekend by weekend, summer by summer, we transformed the neglected structure. James taught himself electrical wiring from library books. I learned to refinish hardwood floors through trial and error. We saved bathroom fixtures from school renovations, repurposed lumber from demolished buildings, and scoured estate sales for furniture we could restore. Each improvement represented hours of labor, problem-solving, and the occasional colorful language when projects didn't go as planned. The porch screens had to be replaced 3 times before we discovered a squirrel was creating the mysterious tears. The living room ceiling collapsed during a particularly heavy snow, requiring a complete rebuild in sub-freezing temperatures. Yet, each challenge overcome added to our sense of ownership and pride. The cottage became more than a building. It became a physical manifestation of our belief that patience, persistence, and shared purpose could transform potential into reality. "Nothing worthwhile comes easily," James would tell Michael and Jennifer when they complained about the mosquitoes or the lack of television. "The effort is part of what makes this place special." Now, sitting at the head table of a wedding I had anonymously funded, watching Michael lean toward Emma in a private exchange that made her smile, I wondered if any of these lessons about achievement through adversity, about the satisfaction of earned success, about the value of creating rather than merely consuming, had truly registered with my grandson. The DJ announced the first dance, and Michael stood, extending his hand, to Emma. As they moved to the center of the dance floor, elegant and poised, guests reaching for phones to capture the moment, I felt a complex mixture of pride in the accomplished young man he had become and concern about the values guiding his adult life. As Michael and Emma completed their first dance to polite applause, the DJ's voice echoed through the reception hall. "And now, the groom would like to invite his grandmother, Eleanor Sullivan, to join him on the dance floor." A ripple of surprise moved through the guests, those who had witnessed my earlier revelation and those who hadn't yet heard the whispered explanations circulating among the tables. I felt equally startled, unprepared for this public acknowledgement. Michael appeared before me, hand extended, a tentative smile on his face. "Gran, would you do me the honor?" The gesture seemed both genuine and performative, a public atonement for the earlier oversight. I hesitated, torn between gratitude for his attempt to make amends and discomfort with becoming the center of attention. "I'm not much of a dancer these days," I demurred, aware of Victoria Chatsworth's tight smile and Emma's encouraging nod. "Neither am I," Michael admitted, his voice lowering. "Grandpa was the one with rhythm in the family, remember? But I'd really like to share this dance with you." The mention of James decided me. I placed my hand in Michael's and allowed him to lead me to the dance floor as the DJ began playing Frank Sinatra's "The Way You Look Tonight," a song James and I had danced to at our own wedding reception over 50 years earlier. "You remembered," I said softly as Michael guided me carefully across the floor, his hand respectful at my waist. "Of course," he replied. "You and Grandpa danced to this every anniversary. Jennifer and I used to watch from the stairs when you thought we were asleep." For a moment, the years seemed to fall away, and I glimpsed the thoughtful boy beneath the polished professional exterior. But as we circled the floor, I became aware of the performance aspect of our dance. The approving nods from guests, Emma's parents' careful observation, the photographer capturing what would undoubtedly become a touching highlight in the wedding album. The first hint of discord appeared as the song ended and Michael escorted me back to the head table. Richard Chatsworth intercepted us, his expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, extending his hand with practiced cordiality. "Perhaps we could speak privately for a moment. There are some financial matters I'd like to discuss." Michael's posture stiffened. "Today isn't the time for that conversation, Richard." "On the contrary," his new father-in-law replied smoothly, "I think clarifying the venue payment situation would benefit everyone. Your grandmother's announcement has created some confusion among our guests." The subtle emphasis on announcement carried clear disapproval, suggesting I had deliberately created a scene rather than responded to an uncomfortable situation. "Any confusion was created by the seating arrangements," Michael countered, his tone sharpening. "If Gran had been properly acknowledged from the beginning—" "The seating chart was designed by professional event planners," Richard interrupted, "based on standard protocol for formal weddings. Family relationships and contributions weren't factors in those decisions." I placed a gentle hand on Michael's arm, sensing his rising anger. "It's all right. I'm happy to speak with Mr. Chatsworth." Michael hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "I'll be right over there with Emma if you need me." As he walked away, Richard guided me toward a quieter corner of the reception hall, his hand barely touching my elbow in a gesture that managed to be simultaneously polite and controlling. "Mrs. Sullivan," he began, once we were relatively private, "while your contribution to the venue was certainly generous, I hope you understand that revealing this information during the reception has created an awkward situation for everyone." "That wasn't my intention," I replied carefully, but finding myself seated behind a column, unable to properly see my only grandson's wedding celebration, created an awkward situation for me as well. Richard's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "The Rosewood accommodates 300 guests. Not everyone can be seated at the front." "I understand that," I acknowledged. "But surely you can see how it appeared from my perspective to have paid for the venue only to be placed at the furthest table, without acknowledgement or inclusion in any meaningful way." "The payment arrangement was your choice," he countered. "You specifically requested confidentiality from the Rosewood management. If you had made your contribution known to us during the planning process, accommodations might have been made." His careful phrasing, "might have been," revealed volumes about how little would have actually changed had I announced my financial contribution in advance. "Mr. Chatsworth," I said, straightening to my full height, which still left me looking up at his imposing figure. "I made the payment anonymously because I wanted to give Michael and Emma a gift without obligation or expectation. That doesn't mean I expected to be treated as a peripheral acquaintance at my grandson's wedding." "Of course not," he replied, his tone softening strategically. "A regrettable oversight in the seating arrangements. Which brings me to the purpose of this conversation. I'd like to reimburse you for the venue payment. Tonight, if possible." The offer caught me off guard. "That's not necessary. It was a gift." "I insist," Richard said, lowering his voice. "The Chatsworths pay their own way. We don't accept financial assistance, however well-intentioned." The implication was clear. My contribution represented charity rather than generosity. An implication they found uncomfortable or even embarrassing given their social position. "The money came from selling our family cottage," I explained, wanting him to understand the significance of the gift. A place that meant a great deal to Michael growing up. "It wasn't simply a financial transaction. All the more reason you should be reimbursed," Richard pressed. "Family heirlooms shouldn't be liquidated for wedding expenses. I'll have my assistant transfer the funds to your account first thing Monday morning." Before I could respond, we were interrupted by Jennifer, who approached with a determined expression that reminded me powerfully of James when he'd made up his mind about something. "Everything okay over here?" she asked, her tone pleasant but her eyes watchful. "Just getting acquainted with the mother of the groom's family," Richard replied smoothly. "If you'll excuse me, I should check on Victoria." As he walked away, Jennifer turned to me with raised eyebrows. "What was that about?" "He wants to reimburse me for the venue," I explained, still processing the interaction. "Apparently, the Chatsworths don't accept financial assistance." Jennifer's expression darkened. "Of course they don't. Heaven forbid anyone think they needed help paying for their daughter's perfect wedding." She shook her head in disgust. "Did Michael know they were approaching you about this?" "I don't think so," I replied, glancing across the room where Michael and Emma were chatting with a group of young guests. "And it doesn't matter. The money was a gift. What they choose to do with that knowledge is their concern, not mine." Jennifer slipped her arm through mine, guiding me back toward the reception. "Well, I'm concerned. And I'm not about to let the Chatsworths make you feel like an interloper at a wedding you literally paid for." As we rejoined the celebration, I noticed Victoria deep in conversation with Emma, both women glancing in my direction occasionally. Michael remained separate from their discussion, accepting congratulations from college friends. The unity displayed during our dance was already fracturing, revealing the fault lines beneath the carefully manicured surface of this newly formed family connection. I wondered how these initial tensions would evolve as the evening progressed, and whether Michael's momentary clarity about what truly mattered would withstand the subtle but persistent pressure of his new in-laws' expectations. The reception continued with the appearance of normality. Champagne flowed, the DJ played crowd-pleasing favorites, and guests cycled through the photo booth with props and exaggerated poses. Yet beneath this festive veneer, I sensed growing tension as news of my revelation spread through whispered conversations and surprised glances in my direction. Emma's college friends huddled in conversation near the dessert table, occasionally, looking toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to sympathy. Richard Chatsworth had gathered several distinguished-looking men near the bar, their serious expressions suggesting business rather than celebration. Victoria remained at the head table, maintaining her social smile while carefully monitoring the room. Michael approached, 2 champagne flutes in hand, offering one to me with a tentative smile. "Having a better time now?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. "It's a beautiful wedding," I replied diplomatically. "Emma looks radiant." He nodded, fidgeting with his bow tie in a nervous gesture I remembered from his childhood. "Gran? I want to apologize properly, about the seating arrangement, about not noticing, about everything, really." "You've been busy," I offered, trying to make peace. "Wedding planning involves countless details." Michael shook his head. "That's no excuse. The truth is, I saw the seating chart yesterday and noticed you were at the back. I even mentioned it to Emma, but her mother said everything was finalized and changing things would create a cascading problem with other guests." "And you didn't want to cause trouble," I finished for him. "I didn't want to start my marriage with conflict," he admitted, "which seems ridiculous now, considering what happened anyway." I studied my grandson's face, the features that echoed Robert's, the expressions that sometimes so eerily mirrored James. "Michael, can I ask you something directly?" "Of course. If you had known I paid for the venue, would you have insisted on a different table?" His hesitation told me everything, before he finally spoke. "I'd like to think I would have." "But you're not sure," I concluded gently. Michael sighed, rubbing his forehead. "The past few months have been complicated. The Chatsworths have very specific ideas about how things should be done. Who should be included? Who matters? I've been trying to navigate their world without creating waves." "And I'm a potential wave," I observed. "No, that's not," he began, then stopped himself. "Maybe in their eyes." Richard built his financial firm from nothing. He's proud of that achievement and the social position it's given his family. Victoria comes from old money but limited actual wealth. Together, they've created this image. And a retired school teacher from Maine doesn't fit that image, I said, keeping my tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. Michael had the grace to look ashamed. Their perspective is narrow, traditional. Traditional usually means the grandmother of the groom isn't hidden behind a column, I pointed out, allowing a hint of dry humor to enter my voice. He managed a rueful smile. You're right. I'm sorry. Across the room, I noticed Emma engaged in what appeared to be an increasingly tense conversation with her mother. Victoria's carefully maintained composure was slipping, her gestures becoming more animated as she spoke to her daughter. I think your bride might need rescuing. I nodded, in their direction. Michael followed my gaze, his expression shifting to concern. Probably discussing the change to the scheduled mother-son dance. Victoria had the DJ create a custom mix. And now you've danced with me instead, I realized. It was the right thing to do, Michael said firmly, standing. Excuse me for a minute. Gran. As he crossed the reception hall toward his wife and mother-in-law, Jennifer appeared with her husband Dave, claiming the vacated seats beside me. Richard Chatsworth cornered me at the bar, Dave said without preamble, his normally affable expression serious. Asked a lot of questions about the lake property, when you sold it, what it was worth. He's planning to reimburse me for the venue. Payment, I explained. Jennifer shook her head. It's more than that. He's trying to establish whether your financial contribution was significant to you or just a gesture you could easily afford. I overheard him telling some silver-haired gentleman that his new son-in-law comes from modest but respectable stock. The characterization stung, not for myself, but for what it revealed about how Richard viewed Michael, and by extension, our entire family. Michael seems caught between worlds, I observed, watching as he reached Emma and Victoria, placing a gentle hand on his wife's back. He's been like this since he started dating Emma, Jennifer said, frustration evident in her voice. Gradually changing how he dresses, the restaurants he mentions, even his accent sometimes. It's like he's auditioning for a role in their family. People often adapt to their partner's social circle, Dave suggested reasonably. Adapt, yes, Jennifer agreed, but not erase who they are. The Michael who grew up swimming in that lake and helping Grandpa build birdhouses wouldn't have let his grandmother sit behind a column at his wedding, no matter who was arranging the seating chart. I watched as the conversation across the room intensified. Victoria's practice smile had disappeared entirely, replaced by tight-lipped displeasure. Emma appeared to be standing her ground, though her happiness from earlier had visibly dimmed. Michael stood between them, clearly trying to mediate whatever disagreement had erupted. They're probably arguing about the schedule change, Jennifer guessed, following my gaze. Victoria Chatsworth strikes me as someone who doesn't appreciate deviations from her carefully orchestrated plans. The tension at the trio reached a breaking point when Victoria turned abruptly and walked away, intercepting a server to exchange her empty champagne flute for a full one. Emma remained in place, her shoulders rigid beneath her lace gown. Michael spoke to her intently, his hands gesturing in what appeared to be reassurance. I never wanted to cause problems, I said quietly. Dave patted my hand. You didn't cause anything, Eleanor. You just revealed what was already there. After a moment, Michael and Emma began walking toward us, their expressions composed, but their body language revealing lingering tension. Emma reached us first, sinking gracefully into a chair beside me. Mrs. Sullivan, she began formally, then caught herself. Eleanor, I want to personally apologize for the seating arrangements. It was completely inappropriate, and I should have noticed and corrected it. You had many details to manage, I replied, echoing what I'd told Michael. That's kind of you. But it's not an acceptable excuse, Emma said firmly. especially given your incredibly generous contribution to our wedding." Michael stood behind his wife, his hand on her shoulder. Some silent communication seemed to pass between them before he spoke. "We've made a decision," he announced. "We'd like to honor you properly, Gran, not just with a dance or a changed seating arrangement, but with a public acknowledgement of your gift." I felt a flutter of alarm. "That's not necessary." "It is," Emma interrupted gently. "Not just for you, but for us. For the kind of marriage we want to build and the values we want to uphold." Jennifer raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by Emma's stance. "What does Victoria think of this plan?" A shadow crossed Emma's face. "My mother believes the reception should proceed as planned without further disruptions." "And yet here you are," Dave observed. "Here we are," Michael confirmed, his expression more determined than I'd seen it all day. "Some things are more important than adhering to someone else's expectations." The words echoed James's philosophy, so precisely that for a moment, I felt his presence acutely, as if he were standing beside us, nodding approval at this glimmer of the values we'd tried to instill. As the divide between Michael's heritage and his new family's expectations widened, I wondered whether this moment of clarity would endure beyond the emotional impact of my revelation, or if the pressure to conform would eventually erode his rediscovered principles. The DJ's voice cut through the ambient chatter of the reception. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. The groom would like to make a special announcement." Conversations paused as guests turned toward the small stage where Michael now stood, microphone in hand. Emma had taken position beside him, her expression a mixture of determination and nervousness. At the bar, Richard Chatsworth straightened, his attention instantly focused on his son-in-law. Victoria, mid-conversation with another elegantly dressed woman, froze with a champagne flute halfway to her lips. Jennifer squeezed my hand. "Looks like they're really going through with it." "Good evening, everyone," Michael began, his voice steady despite the tension visible in his shoulders. "Emma and I want to thank you all for sharing this special day with us." A polite murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. "As many of you know, we're celebrating in one of Boston's most beautiful venues. The Rosewood Estate has been a dream location for Emma since she first attended a charity gala here in high school." Emma nodded, smiling up at her husband. "What most of you don't know, what even I didn't know until today, is that this dream location was made possible through an extraordinary act of generosity." Victoria began moving through the crowd toward the stage, her expression alarmed. Richard set down his drink and followed, his long strides quickly closing the distance. "My grandmother, Eleanor Sullivan," Michael continued, gesturing toward where I sat, "secretly paid the entire venue fee 6 months ago as a gift to us. She did this without seeking recognition or thanks, asking the Rosewood management to keep her contribution confidential until she chose to reveal it." Heads turned in my direction. I felt my cheeks warm with unwanted attention as Jennifer gave my shoulders a supportive squeeze. "What makes this gift even more meaningful," Michael's voice caught slightly, "is the personal sacrifice it represented. My grandmother sold the family cottage on Lake Winnipesaukee, a place that has been central to our family for decades, a place where I spent every summer of my childhood to make this gift possible." A collective awe rippled through the gathering. Victoria had reached the edge of the stage, her hand extended toward Emma in a clear summons. Emma deliberately turned away from her mother, taking a half-step closer to Michael. I'm ashamed to admit that despite this extraordinary generosity, my grandmother was seated at the back of the reception hall, behind a column, separated from the celebration she made possible. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Victoria's hand dropped to her side, her face a mask of controlled fury. Richard had reached her side, placing a restraining hand on her arm as if sensing her impulse to intervene. "This evening is not just a celebration of Emma's and my marriage," Michael continued, his voice gaining strength. It's also an opportunity to honor the values that truly matter in building a life together. Generosity without expectation of return, sacrifice for those we love, and the courage to acknowledge our mistakes and make them right. Emma stepped forward, taking the microphone. Which is why Michael and I would like to invite Eleanor Sullivan to join us for this next portion of the reception, not just as a guest, but as the person whose selfless gift made this entire celebration possible. My heart pounded as every eye in the room turned toward me. This public acknowledgement, while well-intentioned, represented exactly the kind of recognition I had never sought. Yet I could see in Michael's and Emma's faces a genuine desire to correct what they now recognized as a significant oversight. I stood slowly, feeling every one of my 78 years as I made my way toward the stage. Michael descended the steps to meet me, offering his arm with a formal gallantry that reminded me so much of James on our wedding day that tears threatened. As we approached the stage, I saw Victoria whisper something urgent to Emma, who shook her head firmly. Richard attempted to intersect our path, his social smile firmly in place. "Mrs. Sullivan," he began smoothly, "while we appreciate Michael's enthusiasm, perhaps we could handle this acknowledgement more discreetly." "No, Richard," Emma interrupted, her voice quiet but resolute. "This is happening." The unflinching certainty in his daughter's tone seemed to catch Richard off guard. He hesitated, then stepped aside, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes betrayed his displeasure. Michael guided me up the steps to where Emma waited. The three of us stood together, facing the sea of curious, somewhat uncomfortable guests. "Gran," Michael said, his voice soft but the microphone carrying it throughout the hall. "Emma and I want to thank you properly for your incredible generosity. Beyond the financial gift, thank you for the values you and Grandpa instilled in me. Values I haven't always lived up to, but hope to honor going forward." Emma took my hand. "And I want to thank you for raising the kind of grandson who, when reminded of what truly matters, has the courage to make things right, even when it's uncomfortable." The sincerity in her voice surprised me. Perhaps there was more to Emma Chatsworth than the society princess I had initially perceived. Victoria moved suddenly, ascending the steps with practiced grace, her social mask firmly back in place. "What a touching moment," she said, her voice pitched to Carrie. "The Chatsworth family is deeply grateful for Eleanor's contribution, unexpected though it was." Her emphasis on unexpected carried multiple implications. That the gift had been a surprise, yes, but also that it had been presumptuous, even inappropriate. "Now," Victoria continued briskly, "let's continue with our scheduled celebrations. I believe the mother-son dance is next." It was a masterful attempt to regain control of the narrative and the event, acknowledging my contribution while simultaneously minimizing it and moving attention elsewhere. In another circumstance, I might have admired her social dexterity. But Emma, to my surprise, didn't yield. "Actually, Mother, we're adjusting the schedule. Eleanor will be cutting the cake with us, and we'd like her to share a few words about Michael growing up." Victoria's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. "Darling, the schedule has been carefully planned. The photographer has a timeline. The catering staff is coordinated." "The schedule can adapt," Emma interrupted, her tone respectful but firm. "This is important to us." The tension between mother and daughter was palpable. I realized we had reached a watershed moment, not just in the reception, but in the dynamics of both families. Whatever happened next would define relationships moving forward. Richard joined his wife on stage, immediately grasping the situation. "Perhaps a compromise," he suggested smoothly. "We could include Eleanor in the cake cutting while maintaining the planned sequence of events." Michael shook his head. "With respect, Richard, this isn't about the schedule. It's about acknowledging what matters, what has always mattered." Victoria's practiced composure finally slipped. What matters, Michael, is that you're making a scene. At your own wedding. Is that really how you want guests to remember this day? If they remember that we chose to honor someone who made a tremendous sacrifice for us, even when it was socially uncomfortable, Emma responded before Michael could. Yes, I'm perfectly comfortable with that memory. The gauntlet had been thrown. Victoria and Richard exchanged glances, a silent communication born of decades together. In that moment, I sensed their recognition that they faced not just a minor disruption to their planned event, but a fundamental challenge to their authority and social orchestration. We had arrived at the point of no return, where pleasantries could no longer paper over the growing rift between competing values and expectations. Whatever came next would irrevocably shape the relationship between these newly joined families. Richard Chatsworth recovered first, his years of corporate negotiation evident in his smooth pivot. I think we all want the same thing, a memorable celebration that honors family. He gestured to the waiting guests. Why don't we continue this discussion privately, rather than keeping everyone waiting? It was a reasonable suggestion on the surface, but I recognized the strategy. To move the confrontation away from public view, where the Chatsworths' influence would face less scrutiny. Michael seemed about to agree when Emma spoke. Dad, we're not debating committee assignments or investment strategies. This is about doing what's right, openly and honestly. A flash of surprise crossed Richard's face at his daughter's defiance. Victoria's careful composure had abandoned her entirely, her expression cycling between disbelief and anger. Emma Catherine Chatsworth, she hissed, dropping her voice through the proximity to the microphone meant many guests still heard. You are making a spectacle of our family over a seating arrangement. No, Mother, Emma replied with remarkable steadiness. I'm making a choice about the kind of person I want to be and the kind of marriage I want to build. The moment hung suspended, heavy with implication. I felt the weight of decades, of choices made and paths not taken, of values taught and examples set, of quiet sacrifices and loud absences. Michael stood at the crossroads of his heritage and his ambitions, the competing influences of his upbringing and his aspirations, physically represented by the people surrounding him on this small stage. In that crystallizing moment, I saw James so clearly in my mind, not as he was at the end, weakened by illness and treatment, but as he had been throughout our life together, principled, kind, uncompromising on matters of character. What would he do in this situation? If I may, I said quietly, stepping forward. This celebration is about Michael and Emma's future together. It shouldn't be overshadowed by disagreements or discomfort, regardless of the cause. Victoria seized the opening. Exactly right. Let's proceed with... However, I continued, my teacher's voice automatically commanding attention. Their future will be built on the foundation of values they choose to honor, choices they make when faced with difficult decisions, and courage they demonstrate when those choices aren't convenient or comfortable. I turned to face Michael and Emma directly. The gift I gave was never about recognition or position. It was about continuing a tradition of support that James and I always tried to provide, often imperfectly, but always with love. Michael's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Let me finish, dear, I said gently. You're standing at a crossroads right now, both of you. Not just about a reception schedule or a seating chart, but about the foundation you're laying for your life together. Will you prioritize appearances or authenticity, social convenience or moral courage? Emma reached for Michael's hand, intertwining their fingers as they faced this moment of truth together. Every marriage faces defining moments, I continued. This is one of yours. Whatever you decide, make the choice you can live with, not just today, when emotions are high, but in the quiet moments of reflection that will come in the years ahead. The reception hall had grown completely silent, the guests riveted by the unfolding drama. Even the servers had paused their duties, trays balanced as they watched from the periphery. Michael looked from me to the Chatsworths, then finally to Emma. In his expression, I saw the internal struggle between the path of least resistance and the harder road of principle. The moment stretched, pregnant with possibility and consequence. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the quiet certainty that James had always displayed when matters of integrity were at stake. "We've made our decision." "Gran stays at the head table," Michael announced, his voice carrying across the now silent reception hall. "She'll participate in the cake cutting, and I'll be sharing a dance with her after Emma and her father's scheduled dance." Emma nodded her agreement, squeezing Michael's hand. "Furthermore," he continued with growing confidence, "we won't be accepting reimbursement for the venue payment. It was a gift given with love, and we'll receive it in the same spirit." Victoria made a small sound of protest, but Richard placed a restraining hand on her arm, his expression calculating as he assessed the situation. "And finally," Michael said, turning to address me directly, "Emma and I would like to use our honeymoon fund to establish a trust for the repurchase of the lake property, if it becomes available, or a similar property that can serve the same purpose for our family going forward." This unexpected announcement caught me completely off guard. "Michael, no, your honeymoon can happen next year," Emma interjected, "or the year after. What can't be replaced is your family legacy." For the first time in decades, I found myself speechless, overwhelmed by the magnitude of their gesture. It wasn't just about money or property. It was a declaration of priorities, a reclamation of values I had feared were lost. Victoria finally found her voice. "This is absurd. You can't cancel your honeymoon to Bora Bora over an impulsive emotional response." "It's not impulsive, Mother," Emma replied calmly. "It's actually the most clear-headed decision I've made in months." She turned to the waiting guests, raising her voice slightly. "Michael and I want to thank everyone for their patience. We'll now be proceeding with the cake cutting, with Michael's grandmother joining us for this special moment." With that simple statement, Emma effectively ended the public confrontation, redirecting the event back to celebration while holding firm to their decision. It was a masterful demonstration of social grace combined with moral conviction, a balance I hadn't expected from someone I had unfairly judged as merely a society princess. As the wedding planner rushed forward to coordinate the adjusted schedule, and the DJ began announcing the cake cutting, Richard Chatsworth leaned in close to Michael. "This conversation isn't over," he said quietly, his tone pleasant but his eyes hard. "Decisions made in the heat of emotional moments often seem less wise in the clear light of day." Michael met his father-in-law's gaze steadily. "You're right, that this conversation will continue, Richard. But our decision stands." As we moved toward the elaborate wedding cake, a 5-tiered masterpiece adorned with sugar flowers that matched Emma's bouquet, I felt a profound shift in the atmosphere. The tension remained, particularly among the key players in our small drama, but it had transformed from the suffocating pressure of unspoken resentments to the clarifying friction of honest disagreement. The photographer directed us into position, Emma, and Michael at the center, with me now standing proudly beside my grandson rather than watching from a distant table. Victoria and Richard flanked their daughter, maintaining the appearance of family unity despite the visible strain in their smiles. As Michael and Emma gripped the ceremonial knife together, preparing to make the first cut into their wedding cake, I noticed something that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. On Michael's wrist, partially visible beneath his tuxedo sleeve, was James's watch, the vintage Omega I had given him after graduation, the one I thought had disappeared into a drawer. Forgotten, he had been wearing it all day. Through the ceremony, the photographs, the reception, a silent connection to his grandfather and the values we had tried to instill. In that moment, I understood that while the path forward might be complicated, even difficult as these newly joined families navigated their differences, something essential had been preserved. The courageous action Michael and Emma had taken wasn't just about my place at their wedding. It was about the kind of life they were choosing to build together and the principles that would guide them through challenges ahead. The knife sliced through the first layer of cake, and applause erupted throughout the reception hall. With that simple, traditional gesture, we moved into a new chapter, one where authenticity had prevailed over appearance, and where true celebration could finally begin. The remainder of the reception unfolded with a curious mixture of tension and genuine celebration. Victoria maintained a brittle smile, exchanging whispered consultations with the wedding planner as the schedule underwent hasty revisions. Richard circulated among guests with practiced charm, undoubtedly managing the narrative around the evening's unexpected developments. Yet, amid these currents of discomfort, something authentic had emerged. Michael and Emma moved through their reception with newfound ease, as if the weight of pretense had been lifted from their shoulders. They laughed more freely, embraced friends more warmly, and repeatedly found their way back to include me in conversations and photographs. After the cake cutting, Emma's father claimed his scheduled dance with his daughter. As they moved across the floor, I watched from my seat at the head table, reflecting on the evening's revelations. Jennifer slipped into the chair beside me, offering a glass of water. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "Better than I've been in a long time," I admitted. "You changed something tonight," she observed. "Not just for yourself, but for Michael too." I shook my head. I didn't intend to create such disruption. "Maybe disruption was exactly what was needed," Jennifer replied. "You know what Dad used to say about comfort zones." The memory surfaced immediately, James addressing a nervous Michael before his first middle school science fair. "Growth never happens in comfort zones, buddy. The important discoveries are made at the edges of what we know and who we think we are." As Emma's dance with her father concluded, Michael approached, extending his hand to me. "Our turn, Gran," the DJ announced. Our dance as we took the floor, describing me as Eleanor Sullivan, grandmother of the groom and special honored guest. The formal acknowledgement felt strange after decades of arranging my life around others' needs and recognition, yet there was something powerful in claiming this space, in being seen fully by both my family and these assembled strangers. Michael led confidently, having clearly taken dancing lessons in preparation for the wedding. "I've been thinking about something Grandpa used to say," he said as we moved across the floor. "About how we discover who we really are during difficult moments, not comfortable ones." "He would have been proud of you tonight," I said softly. "I'm not sure about that," Michael replied, his expression troubled. "I should have noticed where you were seated immediately. I should have stood up to Victoria's planning weeks ago when she kept finding reasons to exclude you from pre-wedding events. We all make compromises," I acknowledged. "The question is whether we recognize when we've compromised too much." The music carried us past Emma and her father, who had moved to the edge of the dance floor. Richard watched us with calculated interest while Emma offered an encouraging smile. "I've been compromising my way through the past 2 years," Michael admitted. "Small things at first, restaurants Emma's parents preferred, vacations to destinations they approved, clients they recommended. I told myself it was just adapting to Emma's world. And now? Now I realize I wasn't adapting. I was erasing parts of myself. The parts shaped by you and Grandpa, by summers at the lake, by values that have nothing to do with social position or appearance." As we continued our dance, I felt a profound shift within myself as well. For so long, my identity had been defined by my roles: teacher, wife, mother, grandmother, and by what I could provide to others. James's death had begun a painful process of redefinition, forcing me to consider who Eleanor Sullivan was when stripped of her longest-held role as wife and partner. The cottage sale had been another step in that unwanted journey of self-rediscovery, removing the physical space that had anchored so many of my memories and sense of purpose. I had approached this wedding feeling diminished, reduced to a peripheral role in the life of my remaining family, uncertain of my place or value. Yet standing up for myself, first in the small act of announcing my contribution, then in the larger, moments of speaking truth about values and choices, had awakened something I had almost forgotten. The strong-minded educator who had guided hundreds of children, the woman James had admired for her principles and quiet determination, the person I had been before loss and accommodation had worn away my edges. "I think we're both remembering who we are tonight," I told Michael as the music began to fade, "and perhaps discovering new aspects of ourselves in the process." He nodded, a new resolve visible in his expression. "I can't go back to pretending, not after tonight." "Going forward is always braver than going back," I replied, echoing another of James's favorite sayings. As the dance concluded and applause rippled through the reception hall, I realized that this evening represented not just a wedding celebration, but a turning point, the beginning of a reconstruction of identity for both my grandson and myself, built on the foundation of rediscovered values and the courage to live by them, whatever the cost. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.